the first slide of my presentation. So give me the okay thumbs up if you're seeing it. Thank you, awesome. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks again, JJ, for the invitation. I'm really happy to meet the community for DevOps and Agile in Austin, Texas. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the topics that I'm really passionate about and the reason why I started working on my new startup Apptim. And this is mobile performance and how this actually impacts the user experience, which I guess is something that we all care about. So anyone who's here that either works with mobile apps from a, if it's a product manager, product owner, developer, or tester, I think this is going to be a topic that you're going to be interested in, and I hope that you can learn something today and bring it to your team. So before actually I jump into the main topics, just give it a little bit of more background. I think already JJ cover a lot about myself, but just to give you an idea, as he said, I'm originally from actually Uruguay, a small country in South America. We have a few people from Uruguay here today. I was born in Montevideo, which is the capital city. And I actually started working and studying in the software testing field many years ago. Professionally, I started in performance testing specifically, mostly load testing, but I'm going to talk about it today briefly. And also, besides being the co-founder and CEO of Apptim, I'm also a director and board member at Abstracta, which is a company, a software testing consulting company with more than 11 years of experience in this field and with clients worldwide. And I moved to the US, to San Francisco with Abstracta in 2017. When I'm not working at my startup, I like kite surfing, cooking plant-based and vegan. And I also like supporting and helping projects that promote more women in tech. So hopefully we have a lot of women here joining us today. And without further ado, let's just go and jump into the agenda for today. So I'm going to be talking about how mobile performance impacts user experience, introduce different types of tests that can be implemented in an agile environment. And I'm also going to briefly mention some problems that you can identify according to the different factors that affect the performance of a mobile app. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper on the client-side performance, how to test early for that. And then at the end, I'm going to do a brief demo of one of the first tools that we launched at Apptim just 2 months ago. Today, this is a tool that is in open beta, and we're really interested in getting feedback from users. So it's free. This is what we care the most right now for developers and testers to use it, and that's why I'm going to show it briefly today. And of course, if you have any questions or you want to learn more about it, I'm happy to continue the chat after. Okay. So let's get started. Why is it mobile performance relevant today? And the truth is that performance of a mobile app is one of the quality factors that is directly related to the user experience. So I'm sure all of you have experienced at least one that an app on your phone is either slow or it takes too much time to start. It stops responding. You get error messages. You just get tired and close it, right? It's just really frustrating. These are actually some of the few comments that you can find in any app store with a lot of the apps that we use and many issues that today mobile users are facing with apps. But on the other hand, then we have other apps that since the first day that we installed them, they work extremely well, to the point that we are even surprised how well they perform. So what makes these apps work so well compared to the others? And that's exactly what I want to show you today. Why is this so important while we are talking about user experience? Well, in today's world, the digital performance is has a huge impact on the success of a business. We as consumers, we expect digital experience to exceed a face-to-face experience. So really here, the expectations are really high. And there have been many reports and research in the last year about how the performance can actually impact how a user will either engage or delete and abandon an app. And the numbers are pretty high. One report from Apptim says that at least 60% of people will delete or abandon a website after just a first attempt in using it if they face a performance issue. And if these problems keep happening, so if the problem continues, up to 80% of the users will actually delete the app. So this abandonment rate has a huge impact on the digital transformation that many companies are doing. And this is why it's so important to think about what experience are we actually providing to our users. On the other hand, users are becoming more intolerant. So another report from last year actually said that 70% of consumers claim to be less tolerant when they are using digital services. They actually complain more, and it's not even the fact that they're gonna stop using it, but they can even destroy a brand, because when they encounter something that for them is unacceptable, they will first switch to another service or another supplier, and then they will also tell everyone to stop using your app or your service because they didn't like the experience. So it can really hurt the business, and that's why we need to have the user in mind when we are building our apps. But on the other hand, for those companies that get it right, the ones that are consistently delivering world-class experiences, they have an opportunity to drive loyalty, to increase revenue through digital services. And I think the winners are going to be the ones that will consistently operate above this level. And this is why it's so important to think about user experience, and mobile performance is a key part of this, right? So let's see what are the main factors actually that affect mobile performance. So when we think about performance, it's a product of different factors. It includes the servers, which are the back end of our app. It includes the network where the app and the device is connected to. It includes the mobile device where the app runs, and of course the application itself. So as developers and testers, we can measure the performance of an application under different scenarios. So we can simulate different loads, concurrency. We can test our app on different models. Let me move this. Different models of mobile devices, which they varied in hardware, in screen sizes, operating systems. We can think about testing on different networks, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, and more. The truth is that there are many variables that can affect the performance of an application. And a user can have a really bad experience that can be caused by something that is outside of the implementation or the code of the app itself. So that's why it's important to understand what are the factors that are affecting our app and where we should actually put focus when we are thinking about improving the performance, or even trying to optimize different areas where we see we have opportunities for improvement. So what types of, let me move there. What types of performance tests can we run? So each of these factors that I just mentioned, we can test them separately. We're going to identify different problems and we can do optimizations. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. I'm going to cover different types of tests and what we should take into consideration for each factor. So let's start first with backend testing, load simulation. These are the type of tests that everyone thinks about when we talk about performance, right? There can be different types of load tests. We can think about stressing the system. We can think about endurance, which is actually running tests for 6 or more hours, and other types of performance tests. In general, the goal of this test is to understand the behavior of our application under a certain number of concurrent users. and see how the components on the backend server behave and how well they can manage bigger loads. So what are the type of problems that we can identify with this test? We could identify high response times from the servers. We could identify bottlenecks or breaking points in both application servers and database resources. And we could also identify things like bad implementations of scaling policies. And what I mean by this is usually when we're using cloud servers, we can actually configure before how we're gonna scale our servers if we face higher loads. So if we have peaks in traffic, for example. By running performance tests, you can actually identify if this type of policies, scaling policies, are actually implemented correctly. And you can even find that you might be spending more money on servers than what you need and things like that. So if you run tests on the backend, there are specific problems there that you can find and will help you improve how your app behaves under load. So meaning, users are accessing your app concurrently. What's next? Let's talk about the network. And the network, there are two main things that, the two main characteristics that are important to take into consideration. One is the latency of the network. What's the latency? The latency is the time that it takes to send information through the network. It's usually measured in milliseconds. And then we have the bandwidth. What's the bandwidth? It's the maximum capacity, the amount of data that can be transferred through the network. It's measured in bits per second or multiples. So the lower the latency is and the highest the bandwidth is, the better, right? That's the best network that we can have. So the performance of an app can vary if the phone is connected to a 3G or a 4G network. And although this is something that is out of our control, meaning how good the network is, that the network our users are connected to is not something that we can control, we can incorporate in our load test, for example, simulation of different networks and see what's the impact that it has on the response times on the server side. And additionally, we could also test the network from the client side using real devices. We could vary the network that each device is connected to. And with this, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about client-side performance, which involves both the device and the mobile app. So why testing app performance on the client side? You might ask, okay, servers, I'm used to load testing, or I actually come from a background where I'm a performance engineer, a performance tester, but I've never really thought about the impact of the client side. And I already mentioned that app performance is directly related to user experience, and that is a critical aspect that every team or every mobile app team should incorporate in their test cycle. But particularly when we think about the client side and the app itself, we should run tests, or at least we should know how our app behaves in the mobile device, because it's sharing the resources of the device with other apps that are running in the same device. And there's a lot of opportunities for improvement and for optimization that we have. And of course, this will impact the end user experience. So that's why we should take a look at what's happening on the device itself. And actually, to put it in context, this is a quote from a mobile team lead. This is a person that I know. He leads a mobile team at a major rideshare company. And last year I was talking with him, and he mentioned that they have been measuring everything for many years, and they know that they are losing $100 million every year due to two things: app crashes and screen freezes, which are things that are not being caught by their current suite of automated tests. So this means that they are already investing a lot in testing. They're doing functional testing. They have their test automated. They might have whole CI/CD in place, but they still see that there are bugs get into production, there are bugs that are being released, and that these type of bugs are mostly related to performance bugs, things that are happening on devices, and that because our users can't actually finish, checking out or buying something in the app, they're just losing crazy amount of money, right? In this case, they actually have millions of users. That's why it's so big, the amount. This is just one company in 1 year. And it becomes a really challenging thing for businesses to start thinking, how can we improve this? What type of tests do we need to do early on in our development and testing cycle so we can cut this type of issues, regressions earlier, right? And this is a big challenge. Why? Well, the biggest challenge for mobile, and this is one of the differences when you think about web performance, meaning web apps versus mobile apps, is that we have a really, what is called like a fragmented market. And this is all the type of different Android versions that have been released in the past 7 years. So if you see here, in 2013, there were there were 4 Android versions in the market. And in order to get 70% of coverage of the Android market, you could test in 2 devices, right? But if we look at 2019, so this is last year, in order to actually get the same coverage, so to get 70% coverage of the current Android market, we have to test our app in at least 6 different OSs, going from Android 5.0 all the way to Android 9, which is Android Pie. So this is why the market is so, this is why this is a big challenge, because the market is fragmented. Actually, every year that passes, there's a 20% increase in the amount of devices in the market, which means that we as testers and developers, we have to add more tests to our test cycle, right? So we can actually keep that coverage. And on the other hand, of course, for iOS developers, this is a little bit easier because you have less devices, but still you will need to test in different screen sizes of iPhones, iPads, and all that. It's easier, but it's something that you need to cover as well. Okay, so we know that, or at least I told you why we should care about mobile site performance. If you trust me, then you're interested in knowing what things you can actually measure, or what even what problems you can identify. If I convince you about this, let's just talk a little bit about what metrics can we measure on this part of our application. So here I put mainly 4 groups. We have device resource usage. So this is, how our app actually is using the resources from the device where it runs. Things that we could measure here is, CPU usage, memory usage, the data that's being sent and received from the app, battery usage, among others. On the other side, on the right side, I put rendering. Rendering, it's really important because it actually measures how our app is being drawn, how the drawing is in the actual device. So this is where things like rendering times, frames per second, render lags come into place. To give you an idea of what would be acceptable, or at least a recommendation, in order to achieve a fluid rendering, which is set at around 60 frames per second, each frame of our app, needs to be completed in less than 16 milliseconds. And if this is not the case, what will happen is that our app will create a disruption in the animation and it will freeze. Of course, it depends what type of app we have. If we're talking about gaming apps, this is even higher, the requirements. But for normal apps, we should actually measure how our app rendering times is, how many frames per second we're drawing, and then we could actually identify if there's any disruption in animation and how the experience of their user is. On the other hand, if we actually are excessively drawing the screen on our app, this will actually require high CPU or GPU, and it will cause a battery drain. So we need to be really careful on how we manage the rendering of our app in the device itself. Okay,
Sophia,
what else? Yeah.
We have a question from Shlomi. Would you like to reply now or want me to put it for end of the presentation?
Let me check because I'm not actually seeing the questions. But if it's something related to these metrics, I'm happy to answer it now. If not, we can leave it to the end as well.
The question is, do you emulate mobile environments, or are you using cell phone farms and instrumenting the heck out of them?
Okay, so when we talk about these metrics, specifically performance metrics, except from some crashes, I will always recommend to test on real devices. Why? Because that's when you get the actual performance of your app. If you think about emulators, you're gonna be getting an emulated hardware. So it's not truth to what will happen in real devices to your users. So I will always recommend for this type of testing using real devices.
Okay, thank you, Shlomi. I think, please, did that work? No, perfect. Oh, no, I see you now. Great, thank you. I couldn't hear you.
I have a follow-on, but I can wait till the end.
Nice. Thank you, Shlomi.
Perfect. Yeah, please, you can write your questions. I'm not looking at the chat, but I'm happy to answer. I'm going to leave some time at the end to discuss things. So please don't forget your questions. Great. So I talk about resources usage and rendering, two areas that we can look at when we're thinking about performance on the client side and on the device itself. What else can we measure, or what else can we actually capture errors, any exception that happens in the app? If there's any metric in the resource usage that it's being highly used, it could also cause crashes on the app, so we can capture that. Android specifically, you can gather data regarding ANRs, which is application not responding. If an application stops responding, we usually see an error message on the screen with the option for the users to say, wait or close the app. This is generally due to the fact that certain events may not execute in a specific period of time. So, for example, there is, I click on an input and there's no response after 5 seconds, and the app will take it as an NAR and it will show you the message. These are things that happen on Android applications, and you can capture that on the client side. And last but not least, we have response times. A response time is a little bit tricky when you think about how much time does an action or a transaction take. You can define a transaction. Let's think about it as I'm going to measure the time that it takes to log into my app, right? So I fill in all the details. I click on logging or signing in bottom, and then I wait until the next screen is available for me to interact with the app, right? All that transaction, I can actually measure it from the user, user perspective. But it's not only what's happening on the device. It takes things like the server response time, which can be measured with a proxy, for example. It will also include, if there's any database call, it will include the SQL time as well. It will include any network latency, and of course the rendering times. So if you think about the time that a transaction takes to actually be completed, you should consider that there are different parts that add to the transaction time. And if you want to improve that, you need to measure each of them and see where the opportunities for optimization are. And on the other hand, there's the app startup, which is a very important metric for every team that I've worked with. This is one of the things that they look at very often, which is the time that it takes for the app to actually start. When you click on it and it opens, how much time does it take to be available for the user to interact with? And this is something that you can measure, and of course you can improve with time as well. Okay, so this is some examples of metrics that you can measure on the client side. What type of problems can we identify? I already mentioned a few. I'm just going to do a quick here. Wait, I lost there. I'm just going to do a quick overview of some examples. We can detect crashes, as I mentioned. We can see the stack trace, what happened. The user saw a message that the app stopped working, but where did it really happen? You can identify memory leaks. So memory leak happens if an app doesn't free up memory properly. You will see a graph like this. You see the memory usage is increasing over time until the device or the actual app runs out of memory and it crashes. Usually it causes a crash. And of course, screen freezes. I talk a lot about rendering times. You can have a screen freeze due to a high rendering time, or if you have problems with what I was mentioning about frames per second. So it depends how you're actually rendering each screen of your app. If the user is gonna see that there's a problem or a lag in the animation, or if it's something that actually provides a fluid experience. So things that you could detect by testing on the actual device. So when should we start with performance testing, right? And of course, you can always leave this to let last, but I've actually seen that as soon as possible, it's when you should start. And why? It's not just because it's not just because I say so, in the sense that it is really important from our experience, myself and the team, that you need to get familiarized and understand how your app behaves early on, even when you have the first version of your package app. As soon as possible. You don't even need to have any sophisticated testing going on, just by doing some even manual or exploratory testing yourself, or you actually have a team that can help you with. That's when you can start gathering and measuring this data. It would help you, as I said, understand how your app behaves. You can familiarize yourself with these metrics. And also, the earlier you start testing, you can actually gather data, historic data, and you will see how they change over time. With every new version of your app, you will see what changed from the previous version, if there's anything that you should actually take a look at, something that you can improve. You can also identify early on that there's a change in the app that actually affected the performance, so we should do a rollback. As a team, you should have this information available to make decisions earlier, and of course it prevents new performance issues from reaching end users, which is actually something pretty common when you release a new version. New features are coming out, but performance has been slower, or things actually are affecting the user experience on that new version. So when should we start? If we think about, let's say we already have, you have our development cycle, we have maybe some continuous integration, either we're doing it manually or automated testing. Where or when can we actually start incorporating, and what type of tests can we start incorporating in our development cycle? So actually, I gave a talk about this with a colleague a few years ago at an impact conference in the US. And we talked, at the time, we talked about the pros and the cons of doing performance testing along with development versus at the end of it. That's how we call it. In that talk, we actually presented the Agile approach to performance testing as performance engineering along with development, which is actually what you can see on the box in the right, which would be incorporating testing early for performance, so you can get feedback on certain pieces of your application even before you have a production ready version of your application. So this is what we call performance testing. This will be like the Agile approach. I'm going to show you in the next slide what type of tests you can performance tests you can do here. And then we have the most common one. This is the one that we show it at the time. This is what we call the waterfall approach. And this is just doing load testing before you go live. I'm going to actually tell you the end of that talk. It was, there's no one or the other. There's no one approach that is better than the other. Basically, we need both approaches because they actually find different problems, and we can use them in different stages of our development cycle. So as I'm showing here, I would recommend doing performance engineering or the agile approach during the development. So start early with performance engineering, and also you will need to simulate load for acceptance testing. So it's a combination of both that would be required to actually test different pieces early and get feedback early, and then when you're ready to go live or before you release a big new feature, you want to do a load test and simulate load so you can replicate what happens in the real world. So let's take a look at the performance engineering part, right? We are all agile enthusiasts. I put here, probably you are familiar, if you have some background in testing, you might be familiar with the Mike-Kohn pyramid. This is a famous pyramid that actually tells us, or at least it shows, how much time we should invest in automation, different types of tests. The ones that are in the bottom of the pyramid, the unit tests, we should do more of those tests, and we should do less of the ones that are in the top. So we should do less automated UI test, manual, and exploratory. We could actually translate this into performance testing. And if we do this, we could identify that there are different types of tests that we should do more, or we should automate more, and others that we can actually we should actually do less because it requires less maintenance, they're faster to run, and other reasons. So I divided here both on the server side and on the client side what type of test I think we could run. So server side, let's think about unit tests for performance. What would be this? We could actually create unit performance tests that will be automatically checked for response time. That we could even add this type of test to any CI tool that we are using. We can run them multiple times per day. They're very easy to maintain and they're very fast to execute. So it has a huge ROI. We could also have API tests, either executing against our code or against services. And we could consider concurrency. We could simulate X amount of users using these APIs. They're also easier to maintain. And we don't need to run an end-to-end load test to start seeing if our APIs are handling concurrency properly. Then we can also automate the GUI test for performance would be HTTP level, protocol level type of test. I would recommend doing this only for the critical flows of our app. Although we do have unit and API tests, these are very important because they're the ones who are going to provide us with the end-to-end information and performance. And then on the client side, we can also have, if you already have functional automated tests, you can add client-side performance data to those tests, and you will have early feedback on app performance, right? So that's why I put there. You can have automated GUI tests. You can add both the client-side performance, and also you can get put network simulation. If you're going to run those tests on devices, real or emulated, if you do performance testing, I'll recommend real devices. You can also simulate different networks on each device. And lastly, if you have a thorough testing strategy, which includes also exploratory testing, which is something really important for agile teams. Let's say you're doing exploratory testing during or after a new feature is completed, then you can also gather performance data there of your app. And this is something that, again, the earlier you start incorporating that to your test, the more prepared you're going to be to understand where are the improvements and how you can deliver the best experience to your users. Great, let me check the time. Okay, we have 15 more minutes. So I'm going to go really quickly, a quick overview of tools that you can use for performance testing. I'm going to start with the backend. If you're familiar with, load testing, you probably know JMeter, open source tool, very big community, very well known. Also Gatling, which is the last one that I put here, has grown a lot in adoption the last years. On top of these two tools, you can do another tool that is Torus. Torus also open source, very good for developers who want to write performance tests and code in YAML files. And then if you want to actually run this test from the cloud, you have Blazemeter, and it allows you to scale your backend performance tests, okay? What about tools for the client side? So here we have, depends a little bit on the type of app that we want to test. If it's a web or hybrid app, which is basically, you know, a web browser running on mobile, or a native app that has web views embedded, there are tools for testing performance of these apps. They can measure things like how fast the web page loads in mobile. They can give you tips on how to optimize things like loading JavaScript resources, or, you know, cache policies and more. Google has great tools for this. Lighthouse actually comes from the web dev tools from Google. And you also have APM tools, which is application performance management, that can help you capture this data for web or hybrid clients. And on the native side, which is, you know, what I focus more when I talked about the metrics earlier, you have for Android, you have Android Studio, you know, great profiling tools that are available. Then you have instruments that comes inside Xcode for iOS developers. These are great for debugging and for helping to find the root cause of performance issues. And lastly, there's Apptim, which is actually Apptim Desktop is the first tool that we release that allows developers and testers to capture this performance data that I showed before on the client side early. They can do it with exploratory tests. They can add it to their automation tests if they have any already set up. And that's, you know, what I'm going to show you on a very quick demo if I have time. And please, you know, if you have any questions, just let me know. JJ, do you think we have time for a demo, or do you want to move to some questions?
We have several questions. We have around 4 or 5 questions. Sherry suggests a demo first. So if it takes you a few minutes, not more than 10, I would say let's go with that, Sophia.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm going to do the quickest demo I've ever done. And it should be fine. So can you see my screen? I just move a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to show you this tool that we call Apptim Desktop. This is the one that we released 2 months ago, public beta. It's actually a desktop app. So we have an app for Mac and an app for Windows. It allows you to capture all this performance data on both iOS and Android apps. You can connect your device to your Mac or your Windows computer, start a test, and it will capture all the information. So I'm going to quickly show you just really simple how it works, but to give you an idea also of the report that you get from Apptim. So I'm going to start a test. Here on the right side of my screen, I have an Android device. This is an emulator, so please don't use it for real testing. I'm just using it for the demo. So I should select the device that Apptim identifies. I'm going to wait for all the apps that are listed that are actually inside the device. I'm going to choose this one. There is the one that is for demos. And I'm going to put a name to my test. I'm just going to call it demo, and it starts. So right now Apptim connects to the device. It will start the app automatically once it's ready, and will be enable me to start interacting with the app. So this is a normal, exploratory test that you will be running. So basically I'm going to be, doing some, checking some options. So in this app, I actually have different options that I can check boxes, righty bottoms, different things that I can do. And I'm going to show you a little bit, let's say here, and anytime I can report a bug. So I'm going to put, I just click on report bug. I have automatically capture a screenshot. If I want to add any data to the screenshot, I can do. Let's put demo bug here, steps to reproduce it. This would be there. I can attach a video if I want, and then I click continue, and I keep just testing my app. And at any time, I can end session. Before I end session, I'm gonna actually cause the app to crash, because I can do that here. So that's it. My app will crash, stop working. and I'm just going to end my session. Okay. So now Apptim, what it's doing, it's capturing a lot of performance data and everything that happened, a video, screenshot, everything that happened during the test, and it will generate two types of reports. First, I have the session report, which is a whole test that I did, and then I will have also specific bug reports of each bug that I report during the test. So here you can see both. They're first created locally, so you can actually have the reports in your own computer and don't share with anyone. They're private, they're yours. And if you want, we do have the option to publish them to Jira bug tracker. So you can actually do that. I'm gonna start doing that. I'm gonna publish my bug reports, and in the meantime, I'm gonna show you how Apptim report looks like. So just a quick overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions after if you have questions about the report itself. But we have three main areas that we analyze: user experience, resource usage, and errors. Here you will see any issues that we identify. These are usually warnings. If any of these metrics exceeds certain threshold that is based on best practices for both Android and iOS, you will see here a warning. Let's say, the data that is being uploaded and downloaded by the app, it's pretty high. Of course, if there's any exception or crashes, you're going to see it here. You get a video of the whole exploration of the app. You get all the information on resource usage. So you can see CPU usage. You can see, all the rendering times that I talk frame per second. A lot of information that is automatically captured and shown in these graphs. And if you go specifically to the error section, you can see, the exceptions that were caught during the test. And we also enabled you with all the logs from the device, so you can download and do some troubleshooting. Okay, so this is, and lastly, actually, I'm going to report this to Jira so you can see that. This is what we just launched. I mentioned it's free for anyone to use. You can download it directly from our website. I'm just going to choose a project in Jira. I'm going to put this as a bag, medium priority, and just publish, right? And this was publish it to Jira. And when you click here, it will open the ticket in Jira, right? So we make this for testers, developers, it's really easy integration. You can see here the data that is sent, so the environment of the test. You get also a screenshot, and you get the link to the Apptim report, which is published already. So this is for teams that are collaborating, and they need to see all the information in Jira as well. Okay. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you today from Apptim, what we've been working on. We really appreciate that if you're going to use it, give us your feedback. As JJ said, like continuous improvement, that's what we're looking for. We hope this actually helps many mobile teams to start capturing performance data earlier and improve the performance of their apps. So that said, I'm gonna go back to my presentation. I'm just gonna have questions, and of course the last slide to thank you all for listening me and joining us today.
Thank you, Sofia. That's so nice. That was perfect timing, actually. So let's do this. There are several questions. Let's take at most, and to be respectful for people's times, at most 10 minutes to fit as many questions that we can. And after that, people can reach out to you on social media and also on your email. Does that sound okay?
Sounds perfect, yes.
Okay, let's go first with a follow-up question by Shlomi, that it was, what instrumentation do you use on the mobile devices? Or is it that your company's secret sauce?
Well, it depends on the platform. So for Android, we actually access Android elements. I can actually explain how we do that, but it's open source, so anyone can actually do it. It's basically the tools provided by Android. We use ADB to access the mobile device and gather the data. For iOS, you have to use Apple tools. So you have to use instruments, and we combine other tools to actually gather the data from iOS apps.
Nice, that's one. Thank you. Let's keep moving on. Then the other one is from Sherry. How might your rendering performance data affect how much software developers put in the graphics pipeline?
Let me see if I understand the question.
Or Sherry, if you're there, please mute yourself. Maybe I'm paraphrasing it wrongly.
Yeah, how about your render performance data? So the data that you capture is from what's already happening in the app. Basically, it shows you how your app is rendering. I don't quite understand the last part of the question. How does it affect the software developers? But if you can clarify that.
Probably it's because in a pipeline. So that may go along with a question that is from Nikolai that is down there. So let's keep moving on. Maybe Sherry, if you want, it says, okay, what might a dev do with your data? What a developer would do with your.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole point of gathering the data is to see how you can improve your app. So basically the dev knows if exactly like how the rendering times are, if there's any improvement that can be done on that specifically. If there's any, part of like when you're running a test, if there's any part of your app where you see that you are not, the experience is not being consistent for the user, you can see it on a video, or actually when you're manually testing with the data underlying the underlying data, you can actually go and pinpoint where the problem is. So that's why this data it's useful for the team, and specifically the developer, who is the person that is mostly familiarized with the app itself.
Nice, thank you. Then the next one is, all right, which Agile framework do you prefer?
Well, we follow Scrum, even at Apptim, and many of the teams that I worked. I would say it's like we take a few things from many frameworks. I also kind of mix it with Kanban, but I will say Scrum, pure Scrum, is the one that works for us.
Nice. Then Shlomi also asked, can your system perform A/B testing on multiple graphic rendering libraries?
Well, it's not meant for that. And I see her question regarding game testing. I'll say game testing is a whole different world. Of course, you could use Apptim for that, but I'll say you will be you will need even more information regarding like rendering times and graphics that we just don't offer that today. We're mostly focusing on, general, consumer apps, but like general type of apps. And I think game testing requires more deeper data on some areas. So yeah, I will recommend not today, at least, using it for game testing.
Okay, then the one for Shlomi was actually related to perform A/B testing. Do you guys, or do you know how to perform A/B testing on multiple graphic rendering libraries?
When you mean A/B testing, if I would like to have some clarification on that, because if you think about like planning the test, or actually having like two different versions of your app and see how it behaves.
Shlomi, go ahead, please.
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I'm not talking about gaming at all, I'm referring to, for example, I worked for a financial services company, and they would do a lot of testing, and they would do A/B testing on the graphics to determine how the resource, because depending on the kind of graphic, it may load, the operating system may load it differently. And so they would test, load it this way, load it that way, send it down compressed, send it down regular. And how does that work over different bandwidths on the mobile network? So the question is, that's the kind of A/B testing I'm referring to.
Well, yeah, if you could configure A/B tests, and Apptim will be, capturing all the data for each of your tests. As I mentioned previously, we actually have an integration with a device farm in the cloud that allows you to choose which devices you want to run Apptim on, what is going to be the network that you want to simulate on that. But that's the configuration that you need to do on the tool. And Apptim, what we'll do is, run the test, capture the information, and then show you for each device how it performed. So you could do that. That's, how I will use it today.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And then the next question is also, Sherry, what are examples of acceptance tests you use?
When I was referring to acceptance tests, I talk about load simulation, if that's a question Sherry's asking. So of course it depends on the actual app that you're testing, and how many users you have, how you design the load test. I will usually suggest start with the most critical cases, the ones that you want them to work no matter what, and then start with low loads. So like, let's say 100 users, and then you keep increasing through iterations. So you can do like 20% of your goal, and then keep going up until you see that your app works as you expect. But it really depends. Like the whole load testing itself is a topic, but usually when you do a load test to before it go live, you give the okay to the team before you go to production. You need to know a lot about first, like you need to have an environment that it's as close as possible to the one that you have in production, or you're going to have in production. So replicating that, or even sometimes testing in production, if it is an option, it's just the cheapest way to go, so you don't have to replicate the environment. But you need the hardware, and you need to define what are the flows that are going to be testing for the load test. So let's say you have like 3 or 5 critical flows, and then combine them into one load test, which will be as similar as possible to what you expect in production.
Thank you. Then we have another one from Carlos Arturo. What are the main differentiators of older tools like Micro Focus or others, or the use of RPA to do testing?
Okay, those are many different tools there. So Micro Focus, they do. I think, like in general, in the mobile testing industry, from our experience, there are tools that help, and they have done a great job with automating tests. But that's from a functional perspective. Like I have this test, and I want to make sure, and I want to verify that my users are able to do A, B, and C, and I want to repeat that in every test cycle on X devices. And I want to make sure that it works properly. So these are usually called like regression testing. So Micro Focus provides different tools to do that. And actually RPA, it is an alternative, and it's becoming more popular versus the traditional automation practices will require you to actually write a script of your test and repeat that. So that's mostly, and these two things, RPA and automation are both, and at least until today, they're both focusing on the functional aspect of quality. And Apptim, we focus on the performance aspect.
Let's go with the last question. And the rest, please, guys, I would encourage you to reach out to Sophia on social media. The last question is, let's see, here is Nikolai. Does this app work pipelined, headless?
Not now. It's not it might in the future, but right now, as I mentioned, we have like the desktop app that you can download and use it for free. And then we have, for some customers, the option to integrate it to your current automated tests that they might be running in CI and trigger automatically. So those are the two options that we have today.
Okay. Yeah, so soon that's becoming also. And that answers, Callie just replied, also Linux is in the future, not today. That makes sense.
Oh yeah, we do have Yeah, exactly. We do have some Linux users already that have been asking us for a Linux version. So it is coming in the future.
Okay, and we have to stop here. I really, really appreciate your patience, guys. And actually, Sophia, I don't recall that that we have had speakers with that many questions that you just replied all of them. There are a few other questions, and I would, as I mentioned, encourage you guys to reach out to Sophia and the guys of Apptim with more questions. By the way, Sophia just signed me up for one of the beta testers. I have a couple of friends that are also very interested in it. So I encourage you guys to do likewise.
Totally. I just live here. Sorry to interrupt, but also like I wrote a lot about performance testing in general for Abstracta blog, and then also you're generating more content for Apptim's blog, and social media, Twitter. You can find me at SO Palamarchuk, it's my surname, and feel free to reach out with any other questions that you might have to my email, which is sophia@apptim.com.
Nice. Sherry, I will drop Sophia's information also in the meetup. And I just put on the chat, guys, a survey. Sophia, anything before we close this session?
No, I'm just thankful for having the chance to share what we are doing at Apptim, and a topic that I already mentioned I'm really passionate about. And I'm happy that if you find it useful, feel free to reach out, ask any questions, and of course, I'm hoping to be part of this meetup again in the future.
Oh yeah, for sure. As we said, when we have the chance, this is going to be a presential or in-person presentation next time.
Exactly. Hopefully, we'll meet in Austin.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. I just dropped a 3-minute survey, and as I mentioned, this is super useful for Sophia, for the community, and also to keep improving with the content that we are creating in different formats. So thank you so much, guys. See you next time. See you next time,
everyone.
Guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.